quiet town where the shadows play. There's a little bookshop tucked away. During the day he wears a human face, the wolf from the lawn in a cozy space. Dusty tomes line the shelves with care. Each story whispers secrets almost like a prayer. With every page turned, a world comes alive. In the heart of this wolf is where dreams thrive. Oh, he howls at the moon when the night draws near, shedding his skin, no more need for fear. In his library deep, where the stories unfold, he speaks of magic, of legends untold. When the sun goes down and the stars ignite, he tracks the skies and sighs with delight. Downstairs in his lair, in the warm glowing light, he gathers his friends for tales of the night. With a cup of tea and a heart full of glee, he weaves the enchantment, sets their spirits free. From princes and dragons to wishes and dreams, he breathes life into stories, or so it seems. Oh, he howls at the moon when the night draws near, shedding his skin, no more need for fear. In his library deep, where the stories unfold, he speaks of magic, of legends untold. On Friday nights, the lanterns glow bright as he spins every tale. Hearts take flight with echoes of laughter and whispers of lore. In the wolf's gentle voice, they yearn for more. The essence of wonder wrapped in a spell. In the pages of stories, they lose themselves well. Oh, he howls at the moon when the night draws near, shedding his skin, no more need for fear. In his library deep.
I really like the way that song turned out. It's a nice song. But anyway, welcome to Friday Night Fairy Tales. And it is also Valentine's Day, if, you didn't notice. I can't promise any fairy tale romance stories, but I can promise there will be fairy tales. And also, I got the cat cam working again. Unfortunately, there's no cats on it. And feel free to completely ignore the pinned post. I did not remove the pinned post from this window. Oh, hold on. Okay. So now there's no record of the post being there, except the one in the chat. Yeah. I'm eating M&Ms and drinking alcohol. Because honestly, that's the best way to read fairy tales on a Friday night. Especially if you don't have anything else to do on Valentine's Day. No, okay, that's the lid for my metal container. But anyway, I promise things won't get too unhinged. But those of you watching the VOD, the rare few, I've been drinking for the past 2 hours. Slowly, mind you. And in Cokes. Well, I posted on Twitter. I found that they made a cherry and cream Pepsi Max, or Pepsi Zero, or whichever way you want to put it. So, of course, I bought a 12-pack because it was on sale. I also bought a bottle of brandy. Because I really hadn't had any brandy for a while. Everything I've been drinking lately has been, like, coffee-based or butterscotch. Because, well, I like butterscotch. But, yeah. I'm just glad the cat cam's working, because it wasn't working yesterday. Because I tried to show it, and it wasn't connected right, or whatever, and it was not getting any light. I mean, I even put a light over there so you could see the cat blanket. I mimic the cat camera redeem. I don't know. Anyway, it is Friday night and we are doing fairy tales, whether or not you're here for Valentine's Day anyway. Because honestly, now, Valentine's Day is another one of those holidays that they thought, you know, Pagan's got a pretty good idea for today, so let's just commandeer it. Yeah. I forgot what I was going to say. But I'm also currently lurking in a channel. I can't type. Because I'm mod for Myco. Wait. I did not do everything. Oh, there it goes. They're playing Ultima Online, right? Well, not Ultima Online, but Ultima Underground. Yeah. But feel free to like and follow them. Oh, wait. I may have a cat soon. He's looking at the blanket. OBS disconnected. Because why not? Where's my Wi-Fi? Are you shitting me? My Wi-Fi going out on a Friday. That just sucks. Lovely. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Well, yes, meow indeed. Go to my alternate. Well, this is still recording. Honestly, I don't know why the fuck I pay so much for internet when Optimum can't keep it on! I mean, if I got really desperate, I could log into the neighbors. Why are neither of my networks picking up? Well, this sucks. And I honestly don't know if this is getting out or not. But really, OBS hasn't stopped the stop streaming thing yet. It's saying that I don't have any connection. It is currently. Oh, excuse me. It says it's trying to reconnect. It says reconnecting in 60 seconds. And now my computer says no internet access because it wants to die as soon as I'm on. It's not connecting to either of my wireless. I'm sorry, everyone. Okay. Says OBS is reconnected. So again, sorry everyone. My Wi-Fi is shit. Which, you know, I've got both a 2.5 and a 5 on two different network bands. What the hell is a low kicks? As opposed to the opposite of high kicks. Oh, well, I guess we're gonna have to run fucking ads again, because technically I restarted the stream. My pinned message is still there. Like, well, it is on my end. I don't know if you say I see it or not. So I guess I'll go ahead and switch over to the library and wait there. No, you know what? I'm going to go to the be right back. That way, at least the cat camera's on. You can tell what kind of night it is already, because no more than 15 minutes into the original stream, I got disconnected by my own Wi-Fi. I don't know if it was my Wi-Fi, honestly, or if it was Optimum, formerly known as Suddenlink. But either way, we're back. It is Valentine's Day, and we're going to read some fairy tales. Or, I'm going to read fairy tales, and I guess you're going to listen, hopefully. I hope you listen, because they're good fairy tales. Get myself centered in my seat again. Okay, I need to make sure I don't have any weirdness going on in my sounds. No, that's a desk. I need library sounds, because I really hate to have ads playing in the background. Okay. Da da da. Dun 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 dun. Okay. We are in the Grey Fairy book. Still. We are about halfway through it. That means we have read 5.5 of the books from Andrew Lang and Company. I have the rest of them ordered. I ordered them last year, so I'll have to remember to put those on my taxes. But still, I have all of the fairy books. I don't have the other storybooks yet, but I will do those, I guess, when I get to them. I would put them all in order, but I'm going to put those under a different title. Again, I can't guarantee that the stories will not be violent, or romantic for that matter, but I'm going to read them anyway. And I will try to get my new background set up so that I can go ahead and implement the cat cam, and then I'll have everything switched over finally. I am going to try to keep an eye on chat. And I do have M&Ms and my beverage of hydration for the night, which may or may not be a quarter brandy. But anyway, our first story for this Friday night of fairy tales the story of the 3 sons of Hali. Till his 18th birthday, the young Nanger lived happily in a village about 40 miles from Constantinople, believing that Mohammed and Zenebi, his wife, who had brought him up, were his real parents. Nanger was quite content with his lot, though he was neither rich nor great, and unlike most young men of his age, had no desire to leave his home. He was therefore completely taken by surprise when one day Mohammed told him with many sighs that the time had now come for him to go to Constantinople and fix on a profession for himself. The choice would be left to him, but he would probably prefer either to be a soldier or one of the doctors learned in the law, who explained the Quran to the people. "You know the holy book nearly by heart," ended the old man, "so that in a very short time you would be fit to teach others. But write to us and tell us how you pass your life, and we, on our side, will promise never to forget you." So saying, Mohammed gave Nyangar 4 pastries to start him in a great city, and obtained leave for him to join a caravan, which was just about to set off for Constantinople. The journey took some days, as caravans go very slowly, but at last the walls and towers of the capital appeared in the distance. When the caravan halted, the travelers went their different ways, and Nyangar was left, feeling very strange and rather lonely. He had plenty of courage and made friends very easily. Still, not only was it the first time he had left the village where he had been brought up, but no one had ever spoken to him of Constantinople, and he did not know much of the name of a single street or a creature who lived there. He was used to Istanbul. If you know the song, you know the song. Wondering what he was to do next, Nyangar stood still for a moment to look about him, when suddenly a pleasant-looking man came up and, bowing politely, asked if the youth would do him the honor of staying in his house until he had made some plans for himself. Nyangar, not seeing anything else he could do, accepted the stranger's offer and followed him home. They entered a large room where a girl, about 16 years old, was laying 3 places at the table. "Zelida," said the stranger, "was I not quite right when I told you that I should bring back a friend to sup with us?"
"Yes, father," replied the girl. "You are always right in what you say, and what is better still, you never mislead others."
As she spoke, an old slave placed on the table a dish called pilau, made of rice and meat, which is a great favorite among the people in the East, and setting down glasses of sherbet before each person, left the room quietly. During the meal, the host talked a great deal upon all sorts of subjects, but Nyangar did nothing but look at Zelida, for as far as he could without being positively rude. The girl blushed and grew uncomfortable, and at last turned to her father.
"The stranger's eyes never wander from me," she said in a low and hesitating voice. "If Hassan should hear of it, jealousy will make him mad."
"No, no," replied the father. "You are certainly not for this young man. Did I not tell you before that I intend him for your sister Argentine? I will at once take measures to fix his heart upon her." And he rose and opened a cupboard, from which he took some fruits and a jug of wine, which he put on the table, together with a small silver and mother-of-pearl box. "Taste the wine," he said to the young man, pouring some into the glass.
"Give me a little too,"
cried Zelida. "Certainly not," answered his father. "You and Hassan both had as much as was good for you the other day."
"Then drink some for yourself," she replied, "or this young man will think we meant to poison him."
"Well, if you wish, I will do so," said the father. "This elixir is not dangerous at my age as it is at yours." When Nyangar had emptied his glass, his host opened the mother-of-pearl box and held it out to him. Nyangar was beside himself with delight at the picture of a young maiden more beautiful than anything he had ever dreamed of. He stood speechless before it, while his breast swelled with a feeling quite new to him. The 2 companions watched him with amusement, until at last Nyangar aroused himself. "Explain to me, I pray you," said he, "the meaning of these mysteries. Why did you ask me here? Why did you force me to drink this dangerous liquid which has set fire to my blood? Why have you shown me this picture which has almost deprived me of reason?" "I will answer some of your questions," replied his host.
but all I may not. This picture that you hold in your hand is of that of Zelita's sister. It has filled your heart with love for her, therefore, go and seek her. When you find her, you will find yourself. But where shall I find her? Asked Neander, kissing the charming miniature on which his eyes were fixed. I am unable to tell you more, replied his host, cautiously. But I can, interrupted Zelita eagerly. Tomorrow you must go to the bazaar and buy a watch from the second shop on the right hand, and at midnight... But what was to happen at midnight, Neander did not hear, for Zelita's father hastily laid his hand over her mouth. Cried, Oh, be silent, child! Would you draw down on you the impudence of fate of your unhappy sisters? Hardly had they uttered the words, when a thick black vapor rose about him, proceeding from a precious bottle, which his rapid movement had overturned. The old slave rushed in and shrieked loudly, while Neander, upset by the strange adventure, left the house. To answer to Neager's question was to be shown to some watches. The merchant produced... He passed the rest of the night on the steps of a mosque, and with the first streaks of dawn he took his picture out of the folds of his turban, then remembered Zelita's words. He inquired the way to the bazaar, and went straight to the shop that she had described. In answer to Neander's request to be shown some watches, the merchant produced several and pointed out to the one which he considered the best. The price was 3 gold pieces, which Neander readily agreed to give him, but the man made a difficulty about handing over the watches unless he knew where his customer lived. That is more than I know myself, replied Neander. I only arrived in town yesterday, and cannot find the way to the house where I first went. Well, said the merchant, come with me, and I will take you to a good lodger, where you will have everything you desire, at a small charge. Neander consented, and the two walked together through several streets till they reached the house recommended by the merchant. By his advice, the young man paid in advance the last gold piece that remained to him for his food and lodging. As soon as Neander had dined, he shut himself in his room, and thrusting his hand into the folds of his turban, drew out his beloved portrait. As he did so, he touched a sealed letter which had apparently been hidden there without his knowledge, and seeing it was written by his foster mother, Zinabi, he tore it open eagerly. Judge of his surprise when he read these words. My dearest child, this letter, which you will find some day in your turban, is to inform you that you are not really our son. We believe your father to have been a great lord in some distant land, and inside this packet is a letter from him, threatening to be avenged on us if you are not restored to him at once. We shall always love you, but do not seek us or even write to us. It will be useless. In the same wrapper was a roll of paper with a few words as follows, traced in a hand unknown by Neander. Traitors, you are no doubt in league with those magicians who have stolen the 2 daughters of the unfortunate Circassians, and have taken from them the talisman by their father. You have kept my son from me, but I have found out your hiding place, and swear by the holy prophets to punish your crime. The stroke of my scimitar is swifter than the lightning. The unhappy Neander read these 2 letters, of which he understood absolutely nothing, and felt sadder and more lonely than ever. It soon dawned on him that he must be the son of the man who had written Mohammed and his wife,
But he did not know where to look for him, and indeed thought much more about the people who had brought him up, and whom he was never to see again. To shake off these gloomy feelings, so as to be able to make some plans for the future, Neander left the house and walked briskly about the city until darkness had fallen. Then he retraced his steps and was just crossing the threshold when he saw something at his feet sparkling in the moonlight. He picked it up and discovered it to be a gold watch shining with precious stones. He gazed up and down the street to see if there was anyone about whom it might belong to, but there was not a creature visible. So he put it in his sash and inside a silver watch which he had bought from the merchant that morning. The possession of this piece of good fortune cheered Neander up a little, for, he thought, I can sell these jewels for at least 1,000 sequins, and that will certainly last me until I have found my father. And, consoled by this reflection, he laid both watches beside him and prepared to sleep. In the middle of the night he woke suddenly and heard a soft voice speaking, which seemed to come from one of the watches. "Aurora, my sister," it whispered gently, "did they remember to wind you up at midnight?" "No, dear Argentine," was the reply. "And you?" "They forgot me too," answered the first voice. "And now it is 1 o'clock, so that we shall never be able to leave our position until tomorrow, if we are not forgotten again. Then, we have nothing to do here," said Aurora. "We must resign ourselves to our fate. Let us go." Filled with astonishment, Neander sat up in bed and beheld by the light of the moon the two watches slide to the ground and roll out of the room just past the cat's quarters. He rushed towards the door, and on the staircase he rushed towards the door, and on the staircase, but the watches slipped downstairs without his seeing them, and into the street. He tried to unlock the door and follow them, but the key refused to turn, so he gave up the chase and went back to bed. The next day all his sorrows returned with tenfold force. He felt himself lonelier and poorer than ever before, and in a fit of despair he thrust his turban on his head, struck his sword in his belt, and left the house, determined to seek an explanation from the merchant who had sold him the silver watch. When Neander reached the bazaar, he found the man he sought was absent from his shop, and his place filled by another merchant. "It is my brother you want," he said. "We keep the shop in turn, and in turn go into the city to do our business." "Ah, what business?" cried Neander in a fury. "You are the brother of the scoundrel who sold me yesterday a watch that ran away in the night. But I will find it somehow, or else you shall pay for it, as you are his brother." "What was that you say?" said the man, around whom a crowd was rapidly gathering. "A watch that ran away? If it had been a cask of wine, your story might be true, but a watch? That is hardly possible." The caddy shall say whether or not it is possible," replied Neander, who, at that moment, seized him by the arm and dragged him to the caddy's house, but not before the man whom he had found in the shop contrived to whisper to his brother, in a tone loud enough for Neander to hear, "Confess nothing, or we shall both be lost." Thank you for the hydrate. Excuse me. And a stretch. Okay. Okay. I had to find where it was. When the caddy was informed of what had taken place, he ordered the crowd to be dispersed by blows after the Turkish manner, and then asked Neander to state his complaint. After hearing the young man's story, which seemed to him most extraordinary, he turned to question the merchant, who, instead of answering, raised his eyes to heaven and fell down in a dead faint. The judge took no notice of the swooning man, but told Neanger that his tale was so singular he really could not believe it, and that he should have the merchant carried back to his own house. This so enraged Neanger that he forgot the respect due to the caddy and exclaimed at the top of his voice, "Recover this fellow from his fainting fit and force him to confess the truth!" Giving the merchant as he spoke a blow with the sword, which caused him to utter a piercing scream. "Say for yourself," said the merchant to caddy, "that this young man is out of his mind. I forgive him his blow, but do not, I pray you, leave me in his power." At that moment the Bassa chanced to pass the caddy's house, and hearing a great noise, entered to inquire the cause. When the matter was explained, he looked attentively at Neanger, and asked him gently how these marvels could possibly have happened. "My lord," replied Neanger, "I swore I have spoken the truth, and perhaps you will believe me when I tell you that I myself have been the victim of spells wrought by tricksters like this man, who should be rooted out from the earth. For 3 years I was changed into a 3-legged pot, and only returned to man's shape when one day a turban was laid upon my lid." At these words, the Bassa rinsed his robe for joy, and embracing Neanger, he cried, "Oh, my son, have I found you at last? Do not come from the house of Mohammedan Znabi." "Yes, my lord," replied Neanger. "It was they who took care of me during my misfortune, and taught me by their example to be less worthy of belonging to you." "Blessed by the Prophet," said the Bassa, "who has restored one of my sons to me, and at the time I least expected it. You know," he continued, addressing the Cadi, "that during the first years of my marriage I had 3 sons by the beautiful Zambak. When he was 3 years old, a holy dervish gave the eldest a string of the finest coral, saying, 'Keep this treasure carefully and be faithful to the Prophet, and you will be happy.' To the second, who now stands before you, he presented a copper plate on which the name of Mohammed was engraved in 7 languages, telling him to never part from his turban, which was a sign of a true believer, and he would taste the greatest joys of all, while on the right arm of the third dervish clasped a bracelet on the prayer that his right hand should be pure and the left spotless, so that he might never know sorrow. My eldest son neglected the counsel of the dervish, and terrible troubles fell upon him, as also on my youngest. To preserve the second from similar misfortunes, I brought him up in a lonely place under the care of a faithful servant named Gaukluku, while I was fighting the enemies of our holy faith. On my return from the wars, I hastened to embrace my son, but both he and Gauloko had vanished, and it was only a few months since I had learned the boy was living with a man named Mohammed, whom I suspected of having stolen him. Tell me, my son, how it came about that you fell into his hands." "My lord," replied Neanger, "I can remember little of the early years of my life, save that I dwelt in a castle by the seashore with an old servant. I must have been about 12 years old when one day, as I was out walking, we met a man whose face is familiar to that of this merchant, come dancing towards us. Suddenly I felt myself growing faint. I tried to raise my hands to my head, but they had become stiff and hard. In a word, I had been changed into a copper pot, and my arms formed the handle. What happened to my companion I know not, but I was conscious that someone had picked me up and was carrying me quickly away." Oh, that's appropriate that Al-Kazam shows up in chat.
After some days or so, it seemed to me, I was placed on the ground near a thick hedge, and when I heard my captor snoring beside me, I resolved to make my escape. So I pushed my way along the thorns as well as I could, and walked on steadily for about an hour. You cannot imagine, my lord, how awkward it was to walk with 3 legs, especially when your knees are as stiff as mine were. At length, after much difficulty, I reached the garden market, and I hid myself deep down among the cabbages, where I passed a quiet night. The next morning at sunrise, I felt someone stooping over me and examining me closely. "What have we got here, Zanabi?" said the voice of a man a little way off. "The most beautiful pot in the whole world," answered the woman beside me, "and who would have dreamed of finding it among my cabbages?" Mohammed lifted me from the ground and looked at me with admiration. This pleased me, for everyone likes to be admired, even if he is only a pot. And I was taken into the house and filled with water and put on a fire to boil. For 3 years I led a quiet and useful life, being scrubbed bright every day by Zanabi, then a young and very beautiful woman. One morning, Zanabi set me on the fire with a fine mellet of beef inside me to cook for dinner. Being afraid that some of the steam would escape through the lid, and that a haste of her stew would be spilt, she looked about for something to put on the cover, and could see nothing handy but her husband's turban. She tied it firmly around the lid, and then left the room. For the first time in 3 years, I began to feel the fire burning the soles of my feet, and I moved away a little. Doing this with a great deal more ease than I had felt to making my escape from the Mohammed's garden. I was somehow aware, too, that I was growing taller. In fact, in a few minutes, I was a man again. After the 3rd hour of prayer, Mohammed and Zanabi both returned, and you can guess their surprise at finding a young man in the kitchen instead of a copper pot. I told them my story, which at first they refused to believe, but in the end I succeeded in persuading them that I was speaking the truth. For 2 more years I lived with them, and was treated like their own son, till the day they sent me to the city to seek my fortune. And now, my lords, here are the 2 letters which I found in my turban. Perhaps they may be another proof in favor of my story. Whilst Nyangir was speaking, the blood from the merchant's wound had gradually ceased to flow, and at this moment there appeared in the doorway a lovely woman, about 22 years old, her hair and her dress all disordered, as if she had been flying from some great danger. One hand she held 2 crutches of white wood, and was followed by 2 men. The first man Nyangir knew to be the brother of the merchant he had struck with a sword, while the second the young man thought he recognized the person who was standing by when he was changed into a pot. Both of these men had a wide linen band around their thighs and held stout sticks. The woman approached the wounded man and laid the 2 crutches near him. Then, fixing her eyes on him, she burst into tears. "Unhappy Azuf," she murmured, "why do you suffer yourself to be led into such dangerous adventures? Look at the consequences, not only to yourself, but to your 2 brothers." Turning as she spoke to the men who had come in with her, and who had sunk down on the mat at the feet of the merchant. The Bassa and his companions were both struck with the beauty of the woman, and also with her words, and begged her to give them an explanation. "My lords," she said, "my name is Sumi, and I am the daughter of Moises, one of the most famous rabbis. I am the victim for my love of Izaf," pointing at the man who had entered last. "And in spite of his gratitude, I cannot tear him from my heart. Cruel any of my life," she continued, turning to Izaf. "Tell these gentlemen your story and that of your brothers, and try to gain their pardon by repentance." "We were all born at the same time," said the man, obeying the command of Sumi at a sign from the Cadi, "and are the sons of the famous Nathan bin Sadi, who gave us the names of Izuf, Izauf, and Uzaf. From our earliest years we were taught the secrets of magic, and as we were born under the same stars we shared the same happiness and the same troubles.
Our mother died before I can remember, and when we were 15, our father was seized with a dangerous illness which no spells could cure. Feeling death draw near, he called us to his bedside and took leave of us in these words. My sons, I have no riches to bequeath you to you. My only wealth was those secrets of magic which you know. Some stones you already have, engraved with mystic signs, and long ago I taught you how to make others. But you still lack the most precious of talismans, the 3 rings belonging to the daughters of Sirocco. Try to get possession of them, but take heed on beholding these young girls that you do not fall under the power of their beauty. Their religion is different from yours, and further, they are betrothed brides of the sons of Bassa of the sea. To preserve you from a love which can bring you nothing but sorrow, I counsel you in time to the peril to seek out the daughter of the Moises of Rabbi, who perishes a hidden passion for his F, and possesses the book of spells, which her father himself wrote with the sacred ink that is used for Talmud. So saying, our father fell back on his cushions and died, leaving us with burning desire for the 3 rings of the daughters of Sirocco. No sooner were our sad duties finished than we began to make inquiries where these ladies were to be found, and we learned, after much trouble, that Socorro, their father, had fought in many wars, and that his daughters... Page. Whose beauty was famous throughout the land, were named Aurora, Argentine, and Zelida. At the second of these names, both Bassa and his son gave a start to surprise, but they said nothing, and Azif went on with his story. The first thing to be done was to put on a disguise, and it was in the dress of foreign merchants that we at length approached the young ladies, taking care to carry with us a collection of fine stones which we had hired for the occasion. But, alas, it was to no purpose that Nathan Ben Sadi had warned us to close our hearts to their charms. The peerless Aurora was clothed in a garment of golden hue, studded all over with flashing jewels. The fair-haired Argentine wore a dress of silver, and the young Zelida, loveliest of all, the costume of a Persian lady. Among other curiosities that we had brought with us was a flask containing an elixir which had held the quality of exciting love in the breast of any man or woman who drank it. This had been given me by the fair Sumi, who had used it herself and was full of wrath because I refused to drink it likewise, and so returned her passion. I showed this liquid to the 3 maidens who were engaged in examining the precious stones, and choosing those that pleased them best. And as I was in the act of pouring some in a crystal cup, when Zelida's eyes fell on the paper wrapped around the flask containing these words, "Beware lest you drink this water with any other man than him who will one day be your husband."
"Ah, traitor!" she exclaimed. "What snare have you laid for me?"
And placing where her finger pointed, recognizing the writing of Sumi. By this time my 2 brothers had already gotten possession of the rings of Aurora and Argentine in exchange for some merchandise which they coveted, and no sooner had the magic circles left their hands than the 2 sisters vanished completely, and in their place nothing was to be seen but a watch of gold and one of silver. At this instant the old slave whom we had bribed to let us into the house rushed into the room, announcing the return of Zelida's father. My brothers, trembling with fright, hid the watches in their turbans, and while the slave was attending to Selina, who had sunk fainting to the ground, we managed to make our escape. Fearing to be traced by the enraged Sirocco, we dared not go to the house where we were lodged, but took refuge with Sumi.
"Unhappy wretches!" she cried. "It is thus that you have followed the counsels of your father. This morning I consulted my magic books, and saw that your act of abandoning your hearts to the fatal passion, which one will day be your ruin. No, do not think I will tamely bear this insult. It was I who wrote the letter which stopped Selina in the acting of drinking the elixir of love. As for you,"
she went on, turning to my brothers,
"you do not yet know what those 2 watches will cost you, but you can learn it now, and the knowledge of the truth will only serve to render your lives still more miserable."
As she spoke, she held out the sacred book written by Moises, and returned to the following line.
"If at midnight these watches are wound with the key of gold and the key of silver, they will resume their proper shapes during the first hour of the day. They will always remain under the care of a woman, and will come back to her whenever they may. And the woman appointed to guard them is the daughter of Moises."
My brothers were full of rage when they saw themselves outwitted, but there was no help for it. The watches were delivered up to Sumi, and they went their way, while I remained behind, curious to see what would happen. As night wore on, Sumi wound up both watches, and when midnight struck, Aurora and her sister made their appearance. They knew nothing of what had occurred, and supposed they had just awakened from their sleep. But when Sumi's story made them understand their terrible fate, they both sobbed with despair, and were only consoled when Sumi promised never to forsake them. Then 1 o'clock sounded, and they became watches again. All night long I was a prey of vague fears, and I felt as if some unseen was pushing on me, in what direction I did not know. At dawn I rose and went out, meeting Azif in the street suffering from the same dread as myself. We agreed that Constantinople was no place for us any longer, and calling Azuf to accompany us, we left the city together, but soon determined to travel separately so that we may not be so easily recognized by the spies of Sirocco. A few days later I found myself at the door of an old castle near the sea, before which a tall slave was pacing to and fro. A gift of 1 or 2 worthless jewels loosened his tongue, and he informed me that he was in the service of the son of Bassa the Sea, at that time making war in distant countries. The youth, he told me, had been destined from his boyhood to marry the daughter of Sirocco, whose sisters were to be the brides of his brothers, and went on to speak of the talisman that his charge possessed. But I could think of nothing but the beautiful Selina, and my passion, which I thought had conquered, awoke with full force. In order to remove this dangerous rival from my path, I resolved to kidnap him, and to this end I began to act a madman, and to sing and dance loudly, crying at the slave to fetch the boy and let me see my tricks. I consented, and both were diverted by my antics, that they laughed until tears ran down their cheeks, and even tried to imitate me. Then I declared I felt thirsty, and begged the slave to fetch me some water, and while he was absent, I advised the youth to take off his turban, as to cool his head. He complied gladly, and in a twinkling of an eye was changed into a pot. A cry from the slave warned me that I had no time to lose if I would save my life, so I snatched up the pot and fled with it like the wind. You have heard, my lords, what became of the pot, so I will only say now that when I awoke it had disappeared, and I was partly consoled for its loss by finding my 2 brothers fast asleep not far from me. "How did you get here?" I inquired, "and what has happened to you since we parted?" "Alas," replied Azuf,
We were passing a wayside inn from which crowned songs and laughter, and the fools that we were, we entered and sat down. Circassian girls of great beauty were dancing for the amusement of several men, who not only received us politely, but placed us near the two loveliest maidens. Our happiness was complete, and time flew unknown to us, when one of the Circassians leaned forward and said to her sister, "Their brother danced, and they must dance too." What they meant by these words, I don't know, but perhaps you can tell me. I quite well understand, I replied. They were thinking of the day that I stole the son of the Bassa, and had danced before him. Perhaps you are right, continued Zazuf, for the two ladies took our hands and danced with us till we were quite exhausted. And when at last we sat down a second time to the table, we drank more wine than was good for us. Indeed, our heads grew confused, that when the men jumped up and threatened to kill us, we could make no resistance and suffered ourselves to be robbed of everything we had about us, including our two most precious possessions of all, the two talismans of the daughters of Sirocco. Not knowing anything else to do, we all returned to Constantinople to ask the advice of Sumi, and found that she was already aware of our misfortunes, having read about them in the Book of Moses. The kind-hearted creature wept bitterly at our story, but, being poor herself, could give us little help. At last I proposed that every morning we should sell the silver watch into which Argentine was changed, and as it would return to Sumi every evening unless it was wound up with a silver key, which was not at all likely, Sumi consented, but only at the condition that we never sell the watch without ascertaining the house where it was to be found, so that she might take Aurora thither, and thus Argentine would not be alone if by chance she was wound up at the mystic hour. For some weeks now we have lived by this means, and the two daughters of Sirocco have never failed to return to Sumi each night. Yesterday, Zuf sold the silver watch to this young man, and in the evening placed a gold watch at the steps in order to Sumi, just before this customer entered the house, from which both watches came back early the next morning. "If I had only known," cried Neander. "If I had more presence of mind, I should have seen the lovely Argentine, and if her portrait is so fair, what must the original be?" "That is not your fault," replied the caddy. "You are no magician who could give the watch must be wound at such an hour. But I shall give orders that the merchant is to hand it over to you, and this evening you'll certainly not forget." "It is impossible to let you have it today," said Azuf, "for it was already sold." "If that is so," replied the caddy, "you must return the 3 gold pieces with the young man paid." The merchant, delighted to get off so easily, put his hand in his pocket when Neander stopped him. No, he exclaimed. "It is not the money I want, but the adorable Argentine. Without her, everything is valueless." "My dear caddy," said the Bassa, "he is right. The treasure that my son has lost is absolutely priceless." "My lord," said the caddy, "your wisdom is greater than mine. Give judgment, I pray you, in the matter." So the Bassa desired them all to accompany him to his house, and commanded his slaves not to lose sight of the 3 brothers. When they arrived at the door of his dwelling, he noticed 2 women sitting on a bench close by, thickly veiled and beautifully dressed. Their wide satin trousers were embroidered in silver, and their muslin robes were of the finest texture. In the hand of one, a bag of pink silk tied with green ribbons, containing something that seemed to move. At the approach of the Bassa, both ladies rose and came towards him. Then the one who held the bag addressed him, saying, "Noble lord, Noble lord, buy, I pray you, this bag, without asking to see what it contains." "How much do you want for it?"
asked the Bassa. 300 sequins, replied the unknown. At these words, the Bassa laughed contemptuously and passed on without speaking. You will not repent your bargain, the woman went on. Perhaps if we come back tomorrow, you'll be glad to give us 400 sequins when we shall ask, and the next day the price will be 500. Come away, said her companion, taking hold of her sleeve. Do not let us stay here any longer. It may cry, and then our secret will be discovered. And so saying, the two young women disappeared. The brothers were left in the front hall under the care of the slaves, and Nyanger and Sumi followed the Bassa inside the house, which was magnificently furnished. At one end of the large, brightly lit hall, a lady of about 35 years old reclined on the couch, still beautiful in spite of the sad expression on her face. Incomparable Zambek, said the Bassa, going up to her. Give me your thanks, for here is our lost son, for whom you have shed so many tears. But before the mother could clasp him in her arms, Nyanger had flung himself at her feet. Let the whole house rejoice with me, continued the Bassa, and let my two sons, Abraham and Hassan, be told, for they may embrace their brother. Alas, my lord, said Zambek, do you forget that this is the hour when Hassan sweeps in his hand, and Abraham gathers up his coral beads? Let the command of the prophet be obeyed, replied Bassa. Then we will wait until the evening. Forgive me, noble lord, interrupted Sumi, but what is this mystery? With the help of the Book of Spells, perhaps I may be of some use in the matter. Sumi, replied the Bassa, I owe you already the happiness of my life. Come with me, then, and the sight of my unhappy sons will tell you of our trouble better than any words meant. The Bassa rose from his divan and drew aside the hangings leading to the large hall, followed closely by Nyanger and Sumi. There they saw two young men, one about 17 and the other 19 years of age. The younger was seated by a table, his forehead resting on his right hand, which he is watering with his tears. He raised his head for a moment when his father entered, and Nyanger and Sumi both saw that his hand was of ebony. The other man was occupied busily collecting coral beads, which were scattered all over the floor of the room, and he was picking them up and placing them on the same table where his brother was sitting. He had already gathered up 98 beads, and though they were all there, when they suddenly rolled off the table, he had to begin his work all over. Do you see, whispered the Bassa, for 3 hours daily one collects these coral beads, and for the next space of time the other laments over his hand which has become black, and I am wholly ignorant what is the cause of either misfortune. Do not let us stay here, said Sumi. Our presence must add to their grief, but permit me to fetch the Book of Spells, which I feel sure will not only tell us the cause of the malady, but also its cure. The Bassa readily agreed to Sumi's proposal, but Nyanger objected strongly. If Sumi leaves us, he said to his father, I shall not see my beloved Argentine when she returns tonight with the fair Aurora, and life is an eternity till I hold her. Be comforted, replied Sumi. I will be back before sunset, and I leave you my adored Izaf as a pledge. Scarcely had the woman left Nyanger when the old female slave entered the hall where the three brothers still remained carefully guarded, followed by a man whose splendid dress prevented Nyanger from recognizing at first who the person was and whose house he had dined 2 days before. But the woman he knew at once to be the nurse of Zelida. He started eagerly forward, but before he had time to speak, the slave turned to the soldier she was conducting. My lord, she said, those are the men. I have tracked them from the house of the caddy to the palace. If they are the same, I am not mistaken. Strike and avenge yourself. As he listened, the face of the stranger grew scarlet with anger. He drew his sword, and in another moment he rushed on the brothers, when Younger and the slaves of Bassa seized hold of him. "What are you doing?" cried Younger. "How dare you attack them whom the Bassa has under his protection?" "Ah, my son," replied the soldier, "Bassa would withdraw his protection if he knew what these wretches have robbed me of. All I have dearest in the world. He knows them as little as he knows you." "But he knows me very well," replied Younger, "for he has recognized me as his son. Come with me now into his presence." The stranger bowed and passed through the curtain held back by Younger, whose surprise was great at seeing his father spring forward and clasp the soldier in his arms. "Is that you, dear Sirocco?" he cried. "I believed you had been slain in the awful battle when the followers of the Prophet were put to flight. But why do your eyes kindle with flames as shout forth on this fearful day? Calm yourself and tell me what I can do to help you. See, I have found my son. Let that be a good omen for your happiness also." "I did not guess," replied Sirocco, "that the son you have so long been mourning had come back to you. Some days since a prophet appeared to me on the dream, floating in a circle of light, and he said to me, 'Go tomorrow at sunset to the Galata Gate, and there you will find a young man whom you must bring home with you. He is the second son of your old friend, the Bassa of the Sea, and that you may make no mistake, put your fingers in his turban, and you will feel the plate on which my name is engraved in 7 different languages.'" "I did as I was bid," Sirocco said, "and so charmed was I with his face and manner that I caused him to fall in love with Argentine, whose portrait I gave him. But at the moment when I was rejoicing in the happiness before me, and looking forward with the pleasure of restoring you your son, some drops of the elixir of love were spilt on the table, and caused a thick vapor to arise, which hid everything. When it had cleared, he was gone. This morning my old slave informed me that she had discovered the traitors who had stolen the daughters from me, and I hastened hither to avenge them. But I place myself in your hands, and will follow your counsel." "Fate will favor us, I am sure," said the Bassa. "For this very night I expect to secure both the silver and the gold watches, so send at once and pray Zelida will join us." A rustling of silken stuffs drew their eyes to the door, and Abraham and Hassan, whose daily penance had by this time been performed, entered the embrace of their brother. Younger and Hassan, who had also drunk from the elixir of love, could think of nothing but the beautiful ladies who had captured their hearts, while the spirits of Abraham had been cheered on by the news that the daughter of Moises hoped to find in the Book of Spells some charm to deliver him from collecting the magic beads. It was some hours later that Sumi returned, bringing with her the sacred book.
"See," she said, beckoning to Hassan, "your destiny is written here."
And Hassan stooped and read the words in Hebrew.
"His right hand has become black as ebony from touching the fat of an impure animal, and will remain so until the last of his race is drowned in the sea."
"Alas," sighed the unfortunate youth, "it now comes back to my memory. One day as the slave Zambik was baking a cake, she warned me not to touch the cake was mixed with lard. But I did not heed her, and in an instant my hand became ebony as it is now." "Holy dervish!" exclaimed the Bassa. "How true were your words! My son was neglected the advice you gave him on presenting him the bracelet, and since he has been severely punished. But tell me, O wise Sumi, where can I find the last of this accursed race who has brought this doom to my son?"
"It is written here," replied Sumi, turning over some leaves. "The little black pig is in the pink bag carried by 2 Circassians."
When he read this, the Bassa sank on his cushions in despair. "Ah," he said, "that is the bag that was offered me this morning for 300 sequins. Those must be the woman who caused the Sif and Azuf to dance, and took from them the 2 talismans of the daughters of Sirocco. They only can break the spell that is cast on us. Let them be found, and I will gladly give them half of my possessions. Idiot that I was to send them away." While Bassa was bewailing his folly, Abraham in his turn opened the book and blushed deeply as he read the words. The chaplet of beads has been defiled by the game of odds and even. The owner has tried to cheat by concealing one of the numbers. Let the faithless man seek forever the missing bead. Oh, heaven, said Rampertum. That unhappy day rises before me. I'd cut the thread of a chaplet while playing with Aurora. Holding the 99 beads in my hand, she guessed odd, and in order that she might lose, I let one bead fall from my hand. Since then I've sought it daily, but I never have been found it.
Holy dervish, cried the Bassa. How true were your words! From the time that the sacred chaplet was no longer complete, my son has borne the penalty. But may the Book of Spells teach us how to deliver Abraham also.
Listen, said Sumi. This is what I find. The coral bead lies behind the 5th fold of the dress of yellow brocade.
Ah, what good fortune! Exclaimed the Bassa. We shall shortly see the beautiful Aurora, and Abraham shall at once search the 5th fold of her yellow brocade, for it is no doubt she of whom the book speaks.
As the woman closed the Book of Moses, Zelida appeared, accompanied by a whole train of slaves and her old nurse. At her entrance, Hassan, beside himself with joy, flung himself on her knees and kissed her hand.
My lord, he said to the Bassa,
pardon me these transports. No elixir of love is needed to inflame my heart. Let the marriage rite make us speedily one.
My son, are you mad? Asked the Bassa. For as long as the misfortunes for your brothers last, you shall alone be happy. And whoever heard of a bridegroom with a black hand? Wait yet a little longer, till the black pig is drowned in the sea.
Yes, dear son, said Zelida. Our happiness will be increased tenfold when my sisters have regained their proper shapes. And here is the elixir which I have brought with me, so that our joy may equal ours.
And she held out the flask to the Bassa, who had it closed in his presence. Zambek was filled with joy at the sight of Zelida, and embraced her with delight. Then she gave way to the garden, and invited all her friends to seat themselves under thick, overhanging branches of the splendid jasmine tree. No sooner, however, had they completely settled, than they were astonished to hear a man's voice, speaking angrily on the other side of the wall.
Ungrateful girls, he said. Is this the way you treat me? Let me hide myself forever. This cave is no longer dark enough or deep enough for me.
A burst of laughter was the only answer, and the voice continued.
What have I done to earn such contempt? This is what you promised me when I managed you for the talismans of beauty. Is this the reward I have right to expect to bestow it upon you, that little pig who is certain to bring you good luck?
At these words, the curiosity of the listeners passed all bounds. The Bassa commanded his slaves instantly to tear down the wall. It was done, but the man was nowhere to be seen, and there were only 2 girls of extraordinary beauty who seemed quite at their ease, and came dancing gaily to the terrace. With them was an old slave, in whom Bassa recognized Guluku, his former guardian of Neanger. Guluku shrank down with fear when he saw the Bassa, as he expected nothing less than death at his hands for allowing Neanger to be snatched away. But the Bassa showed him signs of forgiveness, and asked him how he had escaped death when he had thrown himself from a cliff. Guluku explained that he had been picked up by a dervish who had cured his wounds, and had given him as a slave to the young ladies, now before the company, and in their service he had remained ever since.
But, said the Bassa, where's the little black pig of which the voice spoke just now?
My lord, answered one of the ladies, when at your command the wall was thrown down, and the man who heard speaking was so frightened at the noise that he caught up the pig and ran away.
Let him be pursued instantly, cried the Bassa, and the ladies smiled.
Do not be alarmed, my lord, she said.
He is sure to return. Only give him orders that the entrance of the cave shall be guarded, so that when he is once in, he shall not get out again.
By this time, night was falling, and they all went back to the palace, where coffee and fruits were served in a splendid gallery near the women's apartments. The Bassa then ordered the 3 brothers to be brought before him, so that he might see whether these were the 2 damsels who had forced them to dance at the inn. But, to his great vexation, it was found that when their guards had gone to knock down the wall, the brothers had escaped. At this news, Sumi turned pale, but glancing at the Book of Spells, her face brightened, and she said half aloud,
There is no cause for disquiet. They will capture the dervish.
While Hassan lamented loudly that as soon as the fortune appeared on one side, she fled on the other. On hearing this reflection, one of the Bassa's pages broke into a laugh. "This fortune comes dancing to us, my lord," he said, "and the other leaves us on crutches. Do not be afraid. She will not go very far." The Bassa, shocked at this impertinent interference, desired to leave the room and not come back till he was sent for. "My lord shall be obeyed," said the page, "but when I return it shall be in such good company that you will welcome me gladly," sang he, and he went out. When they were alone, Neander turned to the fair strangers and implored their help. "My dear brothers and myself," he cried, "are filled with a love for these 3 peerless maidens, 2 of whom are under a cruel spell. If their fate happened to be in your hands, would you not do all in your power to restore them to liberty and happiness?" At the young man's appeals, only stirred 2 ladies to anger.
"What," exclaimed, "are the sorrows of lovers to us? Fate has deprived us of our lovers, and it depends on us the whole world shall suffer as much as we do."
This unexpected reply was heard with the amazement of all present, and the Bassa entreated the speaker to tell them her story. Having obtained permission, her sister, she began. And of course, this is one of those multi-tiered stories. So, I'm gonna go ahead and run the ads. Meantime, oh, damn, still my cat's on the bed. But yeah, we'll be back in a few. Still catless. Don't know where they are. I don't see one in the room with me. Oh well. For those of you keeping tab, the story I started has branched into a second story. Because that is a way I've noticed a lot of Arabic tales go. Because we quite literally started with, which story was it? Let me see it. Okay. We started with the three sons of Hali. Have you even heard the name Hali mentioned yet? No, you haven't. Because all we've heard is Bassa of the sea. And we found out about his three sons. But now, the story is branching into the story of the fair Circassians. And I'm not sure if I want to edit it that way because it's not listed as a separate story. It's just part of the story that we're doing. Which, again, is how a lot of Arabic tales go, because they'll tell one story and then branch into a second one. Because if you go into the 1001 Arabian Nights, that is how the stories were done. Because Scheherazade would have to continue stories. And if she ever stopped, that's when she was supposed to be killed. So she continued telling stories and linking other stories continuously until, well, quite frankly, the stories were done. Wow, that bot was auto-purged. Anyway. So we're going to go ahead and get into the second part of the story. And I may go ahead and edit it as a separate story, I don't know. Because it really does reflect back on the main story, but it's considered a separate story. But anyway, the story of the fair Circassians. We were born in Circassia of poor people, and my sister's name is Cecilia and mine Delhi. Having nothing but our beauty to help us in life, we were carefully trained in all the accomplishments that give pleasure. We were both quick to learn, and from our childhood could play all sorts of instruments, could sing, and above all, could dance. We were, besides, lively and merry, as in spite of our misfortunes, we are to this day. We were easily pleased and quite content with our lives at home, when one morning the officials who had been sent to find wives for the Sultan saw us and were struck with our beauty. We had always expected something of the sort, but we were resigned to our lot when we chanced to see two young men enter our house. The elder, who was about 20 of age, had black hair and very bright eyes. The other could not have been more than 15, and was so fair that he might easily have passed for a girl.
They knocked at the door with a timid air and begged our parents to give them shelter, as they had lost their way. After some hesitation, their request was granted, and they were invited into the room in which we were. And if our parents' hearts were touched by their beauty, our own were not any harder, so that our departure from the palace, which had been arranged for the next day, suddenly became intolerable to us. Night came, and I woke from my sleep to find the younger of the two strangers sitting at my bedside, and I felt him take my hand. "Fear not, lovely Delhi," he whispered, "for one who never knew love till he saw you. My name," he went on, "is Prince Delicate, and I am the son of the King of the Isle of Black Marble. My friend whom travels with me is one of the richest nobles of my country, and the secrets which he knows are the envy of the Sultan himself. And we are left our native country because my father wished me to marry a lady of great beauty, but with one eye a trifle smaller than the other. My vanity was flattered at so speedy a conquest, and I was charmed with the way the young man had declared his passion. I turned my eyes slowly on him, and the look I gave him caused him almost to lose his senses. He fell fainting forward, and I was unable to move until Tazila, who had hastily put on a dress, ran to my assistance together with Athalamus, the young noble of whom the prince had spoken. As soon as we were ourselves again, we began to befall our fate, and the journey that we were to take the next day to the very Constantinople. But we felt a little comforted by Athalamus, who assured us that he and the prince would follow in our steps and would somehow contrive to speak to us. Then they kissed our hands and left the house by the side way. A few moments later, our parents came to tell us that the escort had arrived and had taken farewell of them when we mounted the camels and took our seats in a kind of box that was fixed to the side of the animal. These boxes were large enough to sleep in comfortably, and as there was a window in the upper part, we were able to see the country through which we passed. For several days we journeyed on, feeling sad and anxious as to what might become of us, when one day, as I was looking at the window of our room, I heard my name called, and beheld a beautifully dressed girl jumping out of the box on the other side of our camel. One glance told me it was the prince, and my heart bounded with joy. It was, he said, Elymas's idea to disguise him like this, and that he himself had assumed the character of a slave dealer who was taking the peerless maiden as a present to the Sultan. Thalamus had soon persuaded the officer in charge of the caravan to let him hire the vacant box, so it was easy for the prince to scramble out of his own window and approach ours. This ingenious trick enchanted us, but our agreeable conversation was soon interrupted by the attendants, who perceived that the camel was walking in a crooked manner, and came to find out what was wrong. Luckily, they were slow in their movements, and the prince had just time to get back in his own box to restore the balance before the trick had been discovered. But neither the prince nor his friend had any intention of allowing us to enter the Sultan's palace, though it would be difficult to know how we were to escape, and what was to become of us once we had escaped. At length one day, as we were drawing near Constantinople, we learned from a prince that Thalamus had made an acquaintance with a holy dervish whom he had met on the side of the road, and informed him that we were his sisters, who were being sold as slaves against his will. The good man was interested in the story and readily agreed to find us shelter if we could manage to elude the watchfulness of our guards. The risk was great, but it was our only chance. That night, when the whole caravan was fast asleep, we raised the upper parts of our boxes, and by the help of Thalamus climbed steadily out. We next went back some distance along the way we had come, then striking into another road, reached at last the retreat prepared for us by the dervish. Here we found food and rest, and I need not say what happiness it was to be free once more. The dervish soon became a slave to our beauty, and the day after our escape he proposed that we should allow him to conduct us to an inn situated at a short distance, where we should find two men, owners of precious talismans, who did not really belong to them. Try, said the dervish, by some means to get possession of them. The inn, though not the direct road to Constantinople, was a favorite one with merchants, owing to the excellence of food, and on our arrival we discovered that at least 6 or 8 of the people who had stopped for refreshment. They greeted us politely, and we sat down to table together. In a short time the 2 men described by the dervish entered the room, and at a sign from him my sister made room at her side for one, while I did the same for the other. Now the dervish had happened to mention that their brother had danced. At the moment we paid no attention to this remark, but it came back to our minds now, and we determined that they should dance also. To accomplish this, we used all our arts and very soon bent them to our wills, so that they could refuse nothing of us. At the end of the day, we remained possessors of the talismans and had left them to their fate, while the prince and Thalamus fell more in love with us than ever, and declared that we were more lovely than any women in the world. The sun had set before we quitted the inn, and we had made no plans as to where we should go next, so we readily consented to the prince's proposal that we should embark without delay to the Isle of Black Marble. What a place it was! Rocks blacker than jet towered over its shores and sedged thick darkness over the country. Our sailors had not been there before, and were nearly as frightened as ourselves, but thanks to Salamis, who undertook our pilot, we landed safely on the beach. When we had left the coach behind us, with its walls of jet, we entered a lovely country where the fields were greener, the streams clear, and the sun brighter than anywhere else. The people crowded around to welcome their prince, whom they loved dearly, but they told him that the king was still full of rage at his son's refusal to marry his cousin, the Princess Okimpare, and also of his flight. Indeed, they all begged him not to visit the capital, as his life would hardly be safe. So, much as I should have enjoyed seeing the home of my beloved prince, I implored him to listen to the wise advice and to let us all go to Thalamis's palace in the middle of the vast forest. To my sister and myself, who had been brought up in a cottage, this house of Thalamus seemed like a fairyland. It was built of pink marble, so highly polished that the flowers and streams surrounding it were reflected as a mirror. One set of rooms was furnished especially for me in yellow silk, and silver to suit my black hair. Fresh dresses were provided for us every day, and we had slaves to wait on us. And why could not this happiness have lasted forever? The peace of our lives was troubled by Thalamis's jealousy of my sister, as he could not endure to see her on friendly terms with the prince, though knowing full well that his heart was mine. Every day we had scenes of tender reproaches and of explanations, but Tazilla's tears never failed to bring Thalamus to his knees with prayers of forgiveness. We had been living in this way for some months when one day the news came that the king had fallen dangerously ill. I begged the prince to hurry at once to the court, both to see his father and also to show himself to the senators and nobles. But as his love for me was greater than his desire for a crown, he hesitated in foreseeing all that happened afterwards. At last, Tazila spoke to him so seriously in Thalamus's presence that he determined to go, but promised that he would return before night. Night came, but no prince, and Tazila, who had been the cause of his departure, showed such signs of uneasiness that Thalamus's jealousy was at once awakened. For me, I cannot tell you what I suffered. Not being able to sleep, I rose from my bed and wandered into the forest, along the road which he had taken so many hours before. Suddenly I heard in the distance the sound of a horse's hoofs, and in a few moments the prince had flung himself down and was by my side. "Ah, how I adore you!" he exclaimed. "Thalamus's love will never equal mine." The words roared out of his mouth when I heard a slight noise behind him, and before we could both turn our heads, were rolling in front of us, while the voice of Thalamus cried, "Perjured wretches, answer me! And you, faithless Tazila, tell me why you have betrayed me like this!" And then I understood what happened, and that in his rage he had mistaken me for my sister. "Alas," replied my head in weak tones, "I am not Tazila, but Deli, whose life you have destroyed, as well as that of your friend." At this, Thalamus paused and seemed to reflect for an instant. "Be not frightened," he said more quietly. "I can make you whole again." And laying a magic power on the tongues, he placed our heads on our necks. In the twinkling of an eye, our heads were joined to our bodies without leaving so much as a scar. Only that, blinded with rage as he still was, Thalamus had placed my head on the prince's body and his on mine. I cannot describe to you how odd we both felt with this strange transformation. We both instinctively put up our hands, he to feel his hair, which was, of course, dressed like a woman, and I to raise the turban, which pressed heavily on my forehead. But we did not know what happened to us, for the night was still dark. At this point, Tazila appeared, followed by a troop of slaves bearing flowers. It was only by the light of their torches that we understood what had occurred. Indeed, the first thought of both of us that we must be changed clothes. Now, in spite of the way we were, we prefer our own bodies to those of anybody else.
Okay. Making sure I'm on the right page.
Now, in spite of what we may say, we prefer our own bodies to those of anybody else. Notwithstanding our love for each other, at first we could not help feeling a little cross with Thalamus. However, so deep was the prince's passion for me that very soon he began to congratulate himself on the change. "My happiness is perfect," he said. "My heart, beautiful Deli, has always been yours, and now I have your head also." But the prince made the best of it. Thalamus was much ashamed of his stupidity. "I have," he said hesitatingly, "2 other pastilles which have the same magic properties of those I used before. Let me cut off your heads again, and that I can put matters straight." The proposal sounded tempting, but a little risky, and after consulting together, we decided to let things remain as they were. "Do not blame me, then," continued Thalamus, "if you will not accept my offer, but take the 2 pastilles, and if it ever happens that you are decapitated a second time, make use of them in the way I've shown you, and each will get back his own head." So saying, he presented us with the pastilles, and we all returned to the castle. However, the troubles caused by the unfortunate exchange were only just beginning. My head, without thinking what it was doing, led the prince's body to my apartments, but my women, only looking at the dress, declared I'd mistaken the corridor and called some slaves to conduct me to His Highness's rooms. This was bad enough, but when it was still night, my servants began to undress me, and I nearly fainted from surprise and confusion, and no doubt the prince's head was suffering in the same manner on the other end of the castle. By next morning, you will easily guess that we slept but little. We had grown partly accustomed to our strange situation, and when we looked in a mirror, the prince had become brown-skinned and dark-haired, while my head was covered with his curly golden locks. And after the first day, everyone in the palace had become more accustomed to the change than they thought no more about it. Some weeks after this, we heard that the king of the Black Isle was dead. The prince's head, which once was mine, was now full of ambitious desires, and he longed to ride straight to the capital and proclaim himself king. But then came the question to whether the nobles would recognize the prince with a girl's body, and indeed, when he came to think of it, which was prince and which was girl. At last, after much argument, my head carried the day and we set out, but only to find that the king was declared the Princess Okampare his successor. Much greater part of the senators and nobles openly professed that they would have much preferred the rightful heir, but as I could not recognize him either in the prince or me, they chose to consider us impostors and threw us into prison. A few days later, Tazilla and Thelamis, who had followed us to the capital, came to tell us that the new queen had accused us of high treason, and had been herself present at her trial, which was conducted without us. They had been in mortal terror as to what would be our sentence, but by a piece of extraordinary luck, we had been condemned to be beheaded. I told my sister that I did not see exactly where the luck came in, but Thelamis interrupted me rudely. "What?" he cried. "Of course I shall make use of the pastilles, and—" But when the officers arrived to lead us to the great square where the execution was to take place, for Okampare was determined there should be no delay, the square was crowded with people of all ages and ranks, and in the middle of the platform had been erected on which was a scaffold, the executioner, and a black mask standing by. At a sign from him I mounted first, and in a moment my head was rolling at his feet. With a bound my sister and Thelmas were beside me, and like lightning Thelmas seized a saber from the headsman and cut off the head of the prince. And before a multitude had recovered their astonishment at these strange proceedings, our bodies were joined to the right heads, and the pastille was placed on our tongues. Then Thelamis led the prince to the edge of the platform and presented him to the people, saying, "Behold, your lawful king!" Shouts of joy rent the air at the sound of Thelamis's words, and the noise reached Okampare in the palace. Smitten with despair at the news, she fell down unconscious on her balcony, and was lifted up by the slaves and taken back to her own house. Meanwhile, our happiness was all turned to sorrow. I had rushed up to the prince to embrace him fondly when he suddenly grew pale and staggered. "I die faithful to you," he murmured, and turned his eyes towards me, "and I die a king!" And leaning his head on my shoulder, he expired quietly, for one of the arteries in his neck had been cut through. Not knowing what I did, I staggered towards the saber which was lying near me, with the intention of following my beloved prince as speedily as possible. Then Thelamis seized my hand, but only just in time. In my madness I turned the saber upon him, and he fell struck through the heart at my feet. The whole company...
Hold on. The whole company were listening to the story with breathless attention when it became plain that Deli could go on no further, while Tazilla had flung herself on a heap of cushions and hidden her face. Zambek ordered her woman to give them all the attention possible, and desired they should be carried into their own rooms. When the two sisters were in this condition, Abraham, who was a very prudent young man, suggested to his parents that the two Circassians were both unconscious. It would be an excellent opportunity to search them and see if the talismans belonging to the daughters of Sicaro were concealed in their persons. But the Bassa, shocked at the notion of treating his guests so inhospitable a manner, refused to do anything of the kind, adding that the next day he hoped to persuade them to give the talismans up on their own free will. By this time it was nearly at midnight, and Nianger, who was standing near Sumi, drew out the portrait of Argentine, and heard with delight that she was even more beautiful than her picture. Everyone was waiting on tiptoe for the appearance of the two watches, who were expected, when the clock struck 12, to come in search of Sumi. And that there might be no delay, the Bassa ordered all the doors to be flung wide open. It was done, and there entered, not for the longed-for watches, but the page who had been sent away in disgrace. Then Bassa arose in wrath. "Azimi," he said, "did I not order you to stand no more in my presence?"
"My lord," replied Azimi modestly, "I was hidden outside the door listening to the tale of the two Circassians, and I know you are fond of stories. Give me also leave to tell you one. I promise it shall not be long."
"Speak on," replied the Bassa, "but take heed what you say."
"My lord," began Azumi, "this morning I was walking in town when I noticed a man going the same direction followed by a slave. I entered the baker's shop where he bought some bread, which he gave to the slave to carry. I watched him, and I saw that he purchased many other kinds of provisions at other places, and when the slave could carry no more, his master commanded him to return home and have supper ready at midnight. When left alone, the man went up the street, and turning into a jeweler's shop, brought out a watch that, as far as I could see, was made of silver. He walked on a few steps and stooped, and picked up a gold watch which lay at his feet. At this point I ran up and told him that if he did not give me half of the price, I would report him to the caddy. He agreed, and conducting me to his house, produced 400 sequins, which he said was my share, and having got what I wanted, I went away. It was at the hour for attending on my lord I returned home and accompanied you to the caddy, where I heard the story of the three brothers and learned the importance of the two watches. I had left at the stranger's. I hastened to his house, but he had already gone out, and I could only find the slave, whom I told that I was the bearer of important news for his master. Believing me to be one of his friends, he begged me to wait and showed me into a room, where I saw the two watches lying on the table. I put them in my pocket, leaving the 400 sequins in place of the gold watch and 3 gold pieces which I knew to be the price of the other. As you know, the watches never remain with the person who buys them. This man may think himself very lucky to get back his money. I have wound them both up, and this instance Aurora and Argentina locked safely into my own room.
Everybody was so delighted to hear the news that Azumi was nearly stifled with their embraces, and Yanger could hardly be prevented from running to break in the door, though he did not know where the page slept. But the page begged to have the honor of fetching the ladies himself, and soon returned, leading them by the hand. For some minutes all was a happy confusion, and Abraham took advantage of it to fall to his knees before Aurora, and search in the 5th fold of her dress for the missing coral bead. The Book of Spells had told the truth. There it was, and as the chaplet was now complete, The young man's days of seeking were over. In the midst of the general rejoicing, Hassan alone bore a gloomy face. "Alas," he said, "everyone is happy but the miserable being you see before you. I have lost the only consolation in my grief, which was to feel that I had a brother in misfortune." "Be comforted," replied the Bassa. "Sooner or later, the dervish who stole the pink bag is sure to be found." Supper was then served, and after they had eaten of rare fruits which seemed to be the most delicious in the whole world, the Bassa ordered the flask containing the elixir of love to be brought, and the young people to drink of it. Then their eyes shone with a new fire, and they swore to be true to each other till their death. This ceremony was scarcely over when the clock struck 1, and in an instant Aurora and Argentine had vanished, and in their place stood the 2 watches. Silence fell upon all the company. They had forgotten about the enchantment. Then the voice of Azimi was heard asking if he might be allowed to take charge of the watches till the next day, pledging his head to the end of the enchantment. With the consent of Sumi, this was granted, and the Bassa gave Azumi a purse containing 1,000 sequins as a reward for the services he had already rendered to them. After this, everybody went to his own apartment. Azumi had never possessed so much money before, and never closed his eyes for joy the whole night long. Very early he got up and went to the garden, thinking of how he could break the enchantment of the daughters of Sirocco. Suddenly the soft tones of a woman fell on his ear, and peeping through the bushes, he saw Tazila, who was arranging flowers in her sister's hair. The rustling of the leaves caused Stella to delay, and she jumped as if with a flight. But Azimi implored her to remain and begged her to tell him what happened to them after the death of their lovers, and how they had come to find the dervish. "The punishment was agreed to us by Queen Okikare," answered Deli, "was that we were to dance and sing in the midst of our sorrows, a great fete which was to be held that very day for all her people. This cruel command nearly turned our brains, and we swore a solemn oath to make lovers as wretches as we were ourselves. In this design we succeeded so well that in a short time the ladies of the capital came in a body to Okampare, and prayed her to banish us from her kingdom, before their lives were made as miserable as ever. She consented, and commanded us to be placed on board a ship, with our slave Goloku. On the shore we saw an old man who was busily engaged in drowning some little black pigs, talking to them all the while as if he could understand them. 'Accursed race,' he said, 'it is all you have caused all the misfortunes whom I give you the magic bracelet. Perish all of you!' We drew near from curiosity and recognized in him the dervish who had sheltered us on our first escape from the caravan. When the old man discovered who we were, he was beside himself with pleasure, and offered us a refuge in the cave where he lived. We gladly accepted his offer, and to the cave we all went, taking with us the last little pig, which he gave us as a present. 'The boss of the sea,' he added, 'will pay you anything you like for it.' Without asking why it was so precious, I took the pig and placed it in my work-bag, where it has been ever since. Only yesterday we offered it to the Bassa, who laughed at us, and this so enraged us against the dervish that we cut off his beard when he was asleep, and now he dare not show himself." "Ah!" exclaimed the page, "it is not fitting for such a beauty to waste itself in making other people miserable. Forget the unhappy past and think only of the future, and accept, I pray you, this watch, to mark the brighter hours in store." So saying, he laid the watch upon her knee. Then he turned to Zila. "And you, fair maiden, permit me to offer you this other watch. True, it is only of silver, but it is all I have left to give, and I feel quite sure that you must have somewhere the silver seal, that it may be exactly the thing to go with it.
Why, so you have, cried Dolly. Fasten your silver seal on your watch, and hang my gold one on mine.
The seals were produced, and, as Azumi had guessed, they were the talismans which the two Circassians had taken from Azif and Zolaf, mounted in gold and silver. As quick as lightning, the watches slid from the hands of Tazila and her sister, and Aurora and Argentine stood before them, each with their talisman on their finger. At first they seemed rather confused themselves at the change which had taken place, and the sunlight which they had not seen for so long. But when gradually they understood that their enchantment had come to an end, they could find no words to express their happiness. The Circassians could with difficulty be comforted at the loss of the talismans, but Aurora and Argentine entreated them to dry their tears, as their father, Sicaro, who was the governor of Alexandria, would not fail to reward them in any manner they wished. This promise was soon confirmed by Sicaro himself, who came to the garden with the Bassa and his two sons, and was speedily joined by the ladies of the family. Only Hassan was absent. It was the hour in which he was condemned to bewail his ebony hand. To the surprise of all, a noise at this moment was heard in the corner of the terrace, and Hassan himself appeared surrounded by slaves, clapping his hands and shouting with joy. "I was weeping as usual," he cried, "when all at once the tears refused to come to my eyes, and I looked down in my hand. I saw that its blackness had vanished. And now, lovely Zelida, nothing prevents me from any longer holding your hand, when the heart has always been yours." But though Hassan never thought of asking or caring what had caused the cure, the others were by no means so indifferent. It was quite clear that the little black pig must be dead. But how and when? To the slaves, this answered that they had seen in the morning a man pursued by 3 others, and that he had taken refuge in a cavern which they had left no guard. Then, in obedience to orders, they had rolled a stone over the entrance. Piercing shrieks interrupted their story, and a man, whom the Circassians saw as the old dervish, rushed around the corner from the terrace with the 3 brothers behind him. When the fugitive beheld so many people collected together, he turned down another path, but the slaves captured all 4 and brought them before their master. What was the surprise when the Bassa, when he beheld the old dervish, the man who had given the chaplet, the copper plate, and the bracelets to his 3 sons.
"Fear nothing, holy father," he said. "You are safe with me, but tell us how you came here."
"My lord," explained the dervish, "when my beard was cut off during my sleep by the 2 Circassians, I was ashamed to appear before the eyes of men and fled, bearing with me the little pink silk bag. In the night these 3 men fell on me, and we passed some time in conversation, but at dawn, when it was light enough to see each other's faces, one of them exclaimed that I was a dervish traveling with 2 Circassians who had stolen the talismans from the men. I jumped up and tried to fly from my cave, but they were too quick for me, and just as I reached your garden they snatched the bag which contained the little black pig and flung it into the sea. By this act, which delivers a son, I would pray you forgive them any wrongs they may have done, nay more, that you will recompense them." The Bassa granted the holy man's request, and seeing that the 2 men had fallen victims to the charms of the Circassian ladies, gave his consent to their union, which was fixed to place at the same time as that of Izaf to the wise Sumi. The Cadi was sent for, and the men exchanged their hats of their race for the turbans of the followers of the Prophet. Then, after so many misfortunes, Bassa's 3 sons entreated their father to delay their happiness no longer, and the 6 marriages were performed by the Cadi at the hour of noon. That was a very long story. And it kind of ended up being somewhat romantic. Though honestly, I will say never fall in love because of a potion. It's an old rule of magic. Nope. Well, more of a guideline than a rule. And still no cats. Where the hell are the cats hiding out? But anyway, if you use a love potion to seduce someone, the child produced from it will never know true love. Kind of a sick thing, but, you know. Magic has its issues. It's 11 o'clock. That one story took up both segments of the evening. I can't believe how long that story was. Oh, yeah, I can. I said Arabic Tail was sent to... Oh, wait. There might be a cat soon. He's staring at the blanket. I don't know. I guess I could see who's on. I'm on. Let me see who might be on reading. We might be able to read someone. I don't know. I think the alcohol was wearing off. Not that it was really that strong in the first place, but still. If, you know, anyone has a raid suggestion, I will gladly accept it. Actually, you know what? I see someone on a raid. I haven't raided them often enough. So if Lovely Kill, we'll get those messages up. Ah, really? That's not gonna post? Yeah, screw that hippie. We're gonna raid Shamanic Wolf, who, oddly enough, is playing Baldur's Gate 3. So let me go ahead and... wonder why it's not letting Kill do the things. Okay, it's not letting me do it. Am I not connected? Custom commands. They're still active. What the hell? Ouch. Okay, well. Oh, I can type with it down. Okay, there we go. Get to my emotes. We are just... That's not what I wanted. Damn it. happy sign. Okay. Then I select, hit Control C instead of Control V. Undo the red dimensions. And we're going to raid. Okay, yes. Thank you for dropping by. All that stuff. Hope you have a better Valentine's Day than me. And I'll hopefully see you for the next stream, whenever that might be. Later. Oh, this cat cam's screwed up.
In the quiet of the evening, the shadows softly play. A fairy tale wolf sheds his skin, gently drifting away. With a twinkle in his eye,
There we go.
and a heart full of dreams, he waits.
Have a good night, everyone.